morning, good day, good evening to all of you around the world, wherever you may be. I'm SF Liew from Hong Kong. I'm the co-program director of the Joint Steering Committee of IFKF-WKA Alliance and ISN for the World Kidney Day. My co-moderator is here as well, Ifeoma from Nigeria as well. So welcome all of you to this 18th, now it's the 18th years we have the World Kidney Day, and we have 2 webinars today at different time zones across the world. As you know, the theme this year is very topical, kidney health for all, but in focus on preparing for the unexpected, supporting the vulnerable. And there have been so many unexpected things around the world over the last few years, so it's a very appropriate title. The recent global events, the COVID pandemic, the natural disaster, the earthquake, and also the unfortunate war around the world make it imperative for us to prepare for the unexpected and supporting those vulnerable even through these difficult times. Especially COVID, I think we have actually tried for a very difficult time with everyone. I think all of us have learned a lot. And there's a lot of things we can do better. So it's very timely that today we'll focus on how can we prepare the whole society, including policymakers, healthcare service, government, healthcare professionals, and patients to be prepared for the unexpected event. So I welcome the speaker for today. We will have an introduction from the 2 presidents, Latha Kumaraswami from the IFKF and Professor Agnes Fogo. They will give an introduction. Then it will be followed by a talk by Andrian Liew from Singapore. He's a director of kidney transplant practice at Mount Elizabeth Hospital in Singapore. He is also the chair of the ISN Renal Disaster Preparedness Working Group as well. Then we'll welcome Dina Abdellatif. She is the consultant of internal medicine and nephrology at Cairo University as well. She will speak. She's also a secretary general of the IFKF as well. She will speak on the healthcare professional aspect of this topic. And then I welcome my friend, my colleague from Wang from Hong Kong as well. Bill, congratulations, happy birthday to you, because I understand it's exactly 5 years today. You had a double kidney and liver transplant. So it's very timely that you're coming today. Bill is also a member of the Patient Liaison Advisory Group of ISN. So without further ado, can I ask the video recording of all the speakers to be run now, and we'll have a discussion in about 50 minutes or so. Looking forward to our discussion.
Greetings. I am Agnes Fogo. I'm a professor of pathology, microbiology, and immunology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, in the USA. I am most honored to currently be the president of the International Society of Nephrology. Today, I warmly welcome all of you to this webinar, which is marking World Kidney Day 2023. World Kidney Day was launched in 2006 by the International Society of Nephrology and the International Federation of Kidney Foundations in a World Kidney Alliance. With World Kidney Day, we aim to raise awareness of kidney health among public health officials, general physicians, allied health professionals, individuals and families. Everybody in the world should know about World Kidney Day and take care of our kidneys. We now are celebrating the 18th anniversary of World Kidney Day. This campaign resonates each year with a different theme to highlight different aspects of kidney health. Today and through 2023, we highlight the theme of kidney health for all, preparing for the unexpected, supporting the vulnerable. We are focusing on raising awareness about catastrophes, disastrous events, either natural or man-made, international or local, and their impact on people living with kidney disease whose access to appropriate diagnostic services and treatment and care may be hindered in these challenging circumstances. In light of the recent earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria in early February, with a powerful aftershock creating new heightened anxiety, this topic is of particular importance. This disastrous event caused vast and tragic loss of tens of thousands of lives, and also left thousands of people who survived the earthquake deprived of their homes and unable to access proper healthcare services. Therefore, we, the kidney health community, commit ourselves to advocate for equitable and adequate access to care for people living with chronic disease and help kidney patients prepare for emergencies. These are key elements to improving global kidney health. We are also extremely pleased that you can join us today. During this webinar, you will hear from a wide range of presenters. It will include kidney health professionals and people living with kidney disease, all speaking about the importance of kidney health for all, not just focusing on disease. Now, I am honored to pass on to my counterpart, Latha, Kumaraswami, the president of the International Federation of Kidney Foundations World Kidney Alliance. Thank you very much.
I'm Latha Kumaraswami, and I'm humbled and honored to welcome you on behalf of the International Federation of Kidney Foundations World Kidney Alliance, IFKF-WKA, as its first woman president to the World Kidney Day 2023 webinar. I also welcome the International Society of Nephrology President, Agnes Fogo, and also the past president of IFKF-WKA, Dr. Liew. What is IFKF-WKA all about? Our vision is better kidney health for all, optimal care for people affected with kidney disease or kidney failure. We are an organization which wants to and is promoting better kidney health and with primary, secondary, and tertiary preventive measures, promote optimal treatment and care so as to maximize the health, quality of life, and longevity for people suffering with kidney disease. Our objectives are also to establish an international community and a network for people suffering from kidney disease, and also organizations which are involved in people who are affected by kidney disease. We want to act as a global advocate for issues related to kidney disease. We want to partner with stakeholders, healthcare professionals, patient care organizations, caregivers organizations, dialysis technicians organizations, and other related organizations so that we could create more awareness of kidney disease and give better care. We also want to promote education programs worldwide and conduct research concerning kidney disease and the care of patients with kidney disease. This also includes patient care, caregiver support, diet, and so much more. But most of all, we want to promote World Kidney Day along with the International Society of Nephrology, because this is extremely important for people with kidney disease all over the world. The IFKF-WKA also has the World Kidney Recipe along with ISRNM. And this is to allow people to have access to all kinds of food and not feel left out or marginalized because of diet restrictions. There's a lot to be done through IFKF-WKA. We need more members and urge everyone to join our global community to make a difference in the world. This is really, really important for us. I welcome everyone again to the World Kidney Day 2023 webinar. Thank you.
I would like to thank the organizers for the kind invitation to speak at this year's World Kidney Days webinar. My name is Andrian Liew. I'm a nephrologist based in Singapore, and I'm also the current chair of the ISN Renal Disaster Preparedness Working Group. It is apt that this year we focus with recent events on preparing for the unexpected disaster and to support our vulnerable kidney patients. Now, there are many ways to classify a disaster, but what is common among all these classifications is that they define a disaster as something that exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope with its own resources. And therefore, it is important to have a disaster preparedness plan in place to mitigate the impact a disaster have on the healthcare resources. And disasters are not as uncommon as we think. Even with a publication as early as in the 2009, the authors have demonstrated that between the years 1987 to 2006, there has been a steady increase in the number of natural disasters. And disasters, the impact have been quite significant, affecting millions of victims around the world. And it seems to be more of an issue in the Asia Pacific regions, with more people affected and with a much higher cost to the countries in mitigating the impact of the disasters. And kidney conditions poses a huge strain on the healthcare system during a disaster. Not only do we have to deal with existing patients who have progressive chronic kidney disease, which may get worse because of the impact of the disaster, there are also existing patients who are on dialysis, as well as kidney transplant recipients who need to continue to receive their life-sustaining treatment or life-sustaining drugs. At the same time, disaster could cause a series of events that results in acute kidney injury, the commonest of which is crush syndromes from destructive disasters. But there are also other etiology that can occur during a disaster that can contribute to acute kidney injury and therefore increasing the kidney burden to the healthcare system. Yet one might not have the ability or resources to handle the kidney demands during a disaster, be it dialysis or the stockpile of drugs. And as an example, this is the Asian tsunami of 2004, where you will notice that the only hemodialysis institution in the country has been severely compromised by the tsunami and therefore severely limiting the ability of the country to cope with the dialysis demands. So despite limitations in dialysis facilities and kidney care resources, the demands remains high for kidney care during an unexpected event. And this is a very nice summary of the kind of interventions and support that is needed and provided by the ICE and Renal Disaster Relief Task Force during a period of about 10 over years, highlighting that the disaster comes with it significant morbidity and mortality, and the number of hemodialysis sessions when needed is very, very high. So highlighting that the burden of kidney diseases during a disaster may really have a huge strain on the healthcare system. And there are competing needs during a disaster. And to the disaster relief team, the immediate pressing needs like food and adequate water supply, electricity, and rescue efforts may be more pressing, maybe more prevalent, and therefore the needs of kidney patients and ensuring the smooth provision of dialysis capabilities may become a blind spot to coordinating teams, and hence kidney patients and the needs of kidney patients may be neglected during a disaster event, at least in the early stage. Hence, it may not be surprising that kidney patients become a particularly vulnerable group during a disaster. And as an example, during Hurricane Katrina in the aftermath, close to about half of the patients have missed their dialysis sessions, and this becomes a lot more prevalent in those patients who are hospitalized, simply because they have competing needs with patients coming in with acute kidney injury. And hence affecting their outcomes significantly during that event. And sometimes in situations of scarcity, we may have to innovate in the way we provide dialysis or provide care to kidney patients. So as an example, during the East Timor crisis in 2002, we kind of have to consider, in the lack of hemodialysis facility, using makeshift peritoneal dialysis by considering putting in a urinary Foley's catheter as a form of peritoneal dialysis access, and to actually develop our own peritoneal dialysate using whatever available resources we have, such as using 5% dextrose solution, normal saline, or even electrolyte solution. However, these innovative ways may not become very intuitive to most people, and training is therefore necessary to prepare someone to be able to respond to the situation accordingly when a disaster happens, and therefore highlighting the importance of having a preparedness plan in place before a disaster occurs. So there are multiple publications on how to manage a disaster, and there is really a continuum moving from prevention and mitigation, having a preparedness plan in place, and when the incident does happen, to have an appropriate response, and during the recovery phase to basically review the plans that has been executed and to improve on those plans. And it is important for every country, especially those that are prone to disaster, to have a renal disaster preparedness plan in place that should be incorporated into the national disaster policy. So I'm going to cover the three areas of disaster management briefly. One is the pre-disaster drawer plans, one is the peri-disaster management, and of course the post-disaster recovery. So to begin, let's look at the need to develop a preparedness plan in place before a disaster happened. So again, these are widely available in the literature, but just to summarize, there are various components of a renal disaster preparedness plan, and these are listed here. And with the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the detail, but what is important is that there must be planning to work through various emergency scenarios. These needs to be trained and drills occurred, and all these require some form of coordination, education, and communication to all the various stakeholders. And so this needs to be done way ahead before a disaster strikes. There are key considerations. I think what I want to highlight is that there are a lot of stakeholders that are involved, and one must not forget that despite this being a policy for the country, you need to engage patients and their caregivers, as well as both local and international partners, so that these resources are available. All plans are communicated appropriately before the disaster strikes. There are also tools that can be used, and these are highlighted here, but I cannot stress further communication. These are key in ensuring that a disaster preparedness plan is executed appropriately. The plans, again, once developed, needs to be exercised so that you always update the plans and such that the plans applies to the current threats, goals, and priorities, and that the plans should be reviewed on a regular basis, and any updates should be made after organizational or resource changes, after major exercise, where lessons could be learned, when events have been activated, or if the external environment changes. And a review should occur at a minimum of every 2 years, and the plans can be exercised on a large scale, involving all the stakeholders, or it can be done in small scale exercises involving particular components of the disaster preparedness plans. Let's move on to peri-disaster management. I think for hemodialysis, it's much easier. You kind of need to triage who are the patients who need hemodialysis. You have to move them to the available functioning dialysis centers. But there are specific considerations for PD patients in a disaster. You need to sort of inform them to store about 2 weeks worth of peritoneal dialysis supply, especially if you know that the disaster is imminent. One might want to consider using CAPD bags in case there's electrical disruption to the use of cyclers. Again, with hemodialysis, the concept and the principle is always to try to reduce the number of PD exchanges to maximize the supply duration. For PD patients, you might want to stand by antibiotics for 5 days in case there's an increased risk of peritonitis. And there might be a need to modify the diet. So with the principle to actually reduce the required dialysis dose, and hence you want a diet that generates less urea that may cause the patient less likely to go into fluid overload. So meal plans could be developed for the patients ahead of time. And again, the purpose of the meal plan, as mentioned earlier, is to really to reduce urea generation and to reduce the risk of fluid overloads to allow us to reduce the dialysis dose. These meal plans can be modified according to local and cultural differences. And for patients who have a peritoneal dialysis catheter or hemodialysis catheter, the exit site could be treated and exit site infections could be prevented using very simple household materials. And these are widely available in the CDC website. But it must be communicated to the patient so that they have to know how to manage these situations when they does occur. And finally, let's move to the post-disaster recovery. So once the disaster is over, it is important to ensure that it's resumption of supplies. One needs to look at what is the damage, contamination to the current stockpile, to check that the integrity and of the supply chains are still there, and to determine what's the timeline. In the immediate post-disaster, you really want to make sure that stockpile requirements are available for the next 3 months. And there will be a whole logistic workflow to decide whether they should be centralized holding or decentralized distribution network. One needs to take into account whether transportation access has been damaged and that whether it's easy to deliver these supplies. And of course, you would have to triage on which area you're going to supply first based on the density of patient. While donations are welcome, sometimes it's a two-edged sword because you need to make sure that the donations are relevant and that they do not overwhelm your storage capacity. And of course, you need to reconcile what happens to your patients. A register of patients needs to be developed. You need to review and triage their clinical urgency and the resource availability to care and to adjust the dialysis dose. You need to schedule them for investigations as well as in-person reviews. Teleconsultation can be utilized to reduce the strain on your manpower. And of course, patients on PD need to ensure that the supply stockpile is replenished, and this again needs to be triaged based on the priority delivery. And of course, there are other needs such as housing, food, water, and care. And once the disaster is over, really you do want to look at what are some of the lessons learned and what is the quality indicators of the plans that are being executed. You want to review and update your disaster preparedness plan, then re-communicate this and train your stakeholders again and exercise these new plans so that they are constantly updated. So to summarize, dialysis patients are a vulnerable group during natural disasters with potential disruption to life-sustaining treatment. Developing a disaster preparedness plan for kidney patients allows for greater coordinated care, reduces morbidity and mortality. We need to exercise the disaster preparedness plan regularly to update current threats, resources, and educational needs. And so during a disaster, it's important to adjust the dialysis prescription and meal plans so as to stretch the dialysis supplies for as long as possible. We need to ensure there's appropriate care of exit site that reduces the risk of peritonitis. And once the disaster is over, we need to review the disaster preparedness plans post-disaster, including the lessons learned. And these plans need to be updated, communicated, and exercised again. With that, I thank you for your kind attention.
It's my pleasure to be with you today on the World Kidney Day webinar. And today we will be discussing the challenges facing kidney patients during disasters. And disasters are naturally happening every now and then somewhere in the world. Some of them are natural disasters, and some of them are man-made disasters. Some are man-made disasters. And those disasters leave us with enormous consequences. And we have all followed the recent earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria a few weeks ago. And if we look at the reports that came for this earthquake, we find that in Turkey, about at least 60,000 people were reported to be injured and 15 hospitals reported destroyed. And similarly, in northwestern Syria, where at least 57 medical facilities has been reported damaged or out of service. Disasters leave us with many patients with acute kidney injuries, and it's a burden on the kidney patients. Many patients in disasters like earthquakes, after entrapments, they develop crush syndrome and myoglobinuric acute kidney injury, and they might need dialysis at some times. And unfortunately, those patients, they are not easily spotted and not easily recognized by the rescuers and the healthcare professionals, so that the narrow time window for resuscitations could be missed for those patients. And at the same time, with all the pressure on the health system, of course, the non-communicable diseases and the chronic kidney disease patients are at the least of the priority of any medical facilities. This is a recent publication discussing the effect of the wars or of the armed conflicts on the kidney patients. And this causes direct medical threats on those patients, with increasing the risk of acute kidney injuries and increased risk of deficiency of treatment for those patients and with patients with kidney transplantation. This disasters leads to non-hygienic living conditions and lack of inability to deliver medications for those patients, and inability of those patients to adhere to their treatment due to the lack of medications or due to evacuations or destructions of the healthcare providers. So all this increases the risk of complications and morbidity and mortality of the kidney patients. At the same time, there is an inefficiency of the healthcare system, because many of them are affected by the disaster, many of them are burnt out, and the healthcare system by all is burnt out with those all chaos in the healthcare organization. And some of them are directly destructed by the wars or by the disaster that's happening. So this will leave us with many chronic kidney disease patients progressing to end-stage kidney disease faster than expected, and they might need dialysis. And if the dialysis facility is not available, then mortality rates will grow higher. And this was a recent retrospective cohort study to predict and validate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in individuals with chronic kidney disease patients. And of course, we all know that during the pandemic, the kidney disease patients were suffering from many aspects during the pandemic. They are immune suppressed, and they are a vulnerable group of patients, and who had many of the comorbidities, and they were prone to catch infection with the COVID and prone to develop complications during the COVID era. So in this large retrospective study, They showed that individuals with chronic kidney disease had a high burden of comorbidities and multimorbidity, high risk of pre-pandemic mortality, and predictable high risk of mortality during the pandemic period. The dialysis population gets heavily impacted in the case of disasters, because as we have mentioned, there are many new patients requiring dialysis, whether AKI or whether deteriorating chronic kidney disease patients. So there is disparity between the dialysis demand and the supply, because many of those disasters, many of those centers are affected by the disasters. Many dialysis units become inoperable due to their direct destruction by the weather or by the earthquakes, by the whatever kind of disaster that's happening. Many of them, they are become short of electricity, short of water supply. The disposables and the equipment are damaged by the disaster. And many patients, they are unable to travel to their dialysis facility because of the road closure, because of disruption of the transportation system, or the road destructions, shortages of medical and nursing staff because of maybe sometimes they're located to other impacted areas, or because they become overwhelmed with the increasing number of patients. So many dialysis patients will miss their scheduled sessions and experience more comorbidities. And this was a retrospective analysis in Egypt on the on the effect of COVID-19 in the Egyptian hemodialysis and kidney transplant, and found that nearly 40% of the patients, they come traveling from outside Greater Cairo, and they rely on multiple modes of public transplantation, which was disrupted during the COVID time. And almost half of the patients were missing sessions, or at least arriving late and not taking their full sessions. And of course, during the current quarantine, there was a financial impact on those patients and on the families, leading to nutritional decline and significant psychological impact of those patients. Similarly, in India, in the COVID-19 lockdown, about 60% were affected by or they had disruption in their treatment, and the patients had to rely on their families and on their friends to reach to the healthcare facilities, to reach to the dialysis units, because of the lack of public transportation. And this was also affecting the staff working in those facilities, that they had to stay inside the units, because they might not be able to reach the unit on the next day. Home dialysis, of course, could help some of this situation, especially for the public transportation and for the road closures. But at the same time, home dialysis also, is not 100% free of problems during the disasters, because it might be affected by the electricity and water shortage, or delivering the consumables to the patients, especially in home hemodialysis and in the automated peritoneal dialysis. And many during these disasters shift from automated peritoneal dialysis to the CAPT, and peritoneal dialysis actually in disasters could be called the great savior during disasters, because it needs it's not dependent on specialized facilities, and patients do not have to travel to their dialysis units. Transplantation population also were affected. The patients on the waiting list were affected, and many of the centers, they canceled all the transplant plans, and there was problems related to managing the kidney transplant recipients. And transplant recipients deserved special consideration because of their immune suppressed status and requirements for the uninterrupted medication intake during any kind of disaster. So during the disaster, the transplant recipients are under stress by direct harm by disaster, treatment of disaster injuries of their complications, non-hygienic living conditions, inability to obtain their medications, and increased infection risk, and shortage of the medical personnel and shortage of the medical resources. And all this increase the risk of graft loss or even increasing the rates of mortality for the patients. Of course, postponing the new transplant patients was of reasons, because during all this chaotic environment, this is not the most suitable to start patients with kidney transplantations. Shortage of hospital beds and medical supplies, medical uncertainties and controversies on the immune suppressive approach and risk of interruption in delivery of immune suppression, decreased number of deceased donors because of limited availability of ICU beds and reluctance to maintain hemodynamic stability in potential donors, and declines in the disease and decrease in the number of living donors, with concerns of living donors about risk of to contract nosocomial infections. And recent surveys showed that there was 75% of the centers had to reported that the surgeries, transplant surgeries, were on hold. This was a photo, and this was a report that was published from the Turkey, and it shows the burden of the hospitals during the earthquake, and how the doctors and the nurses are really doing marvelous work, and they really, by time, they get tired and burnt out. Telemedicine had shown to be of great benefit during the time of the COVID and during the time of disasters, because it saved many patients the effort of traveling to hospitals or to clinics just to modify medications or to just for regular follow-ups. But of course, it needs to be adjusted, and it needs to be under supervision to assure patient safety. And lately and recently, the World Kidney Day Joint Steering Committee has published an editorial in the Kidney International on the kidney health for all, on the preparedness for the unexpected in supporting the vulnerable. And I would advise you all to have a look on this editorial and go through all the recommendations to be prepared and have a planning process and better communication with all the facilities and how to get ready and how to be prepared for the case of in the case of disasters. And here I would stop, and I would thank you very much for your patience, and ready for any questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wang. I'm a member of the ISN Patient Liaison Advisory Group representing Northeast Asia region. First of all, I should say that World Kidney Day has a very special place in my heart as my combined kidney and liver transplantation was successfully performed around the World Kidney Day in 2018. Therefore, I feel very privileged to be invited 5 years later on this World Kidney Day 2023 to present a kidney patient's perspective on protecting the vulnerable kidney patients in coping with the unexpected contingencies. Here's a high-level outline of my today's talk. I will first set the theme by laying out the challenges we as kidney patients face, especially when unexpected events happen. Then I will discuss the ways of coping with such challenges more through the patient's lens. I will touch upon some of the key stakeholders in these concerted efforts, including policymakers, healthcare providers, kidney patients, and patient peer groups. At the end of the presentation, I will also briefly argue the importance of international cooperation and collaboration in dealing with the challenges. Chronic kidney disease affects 1 in 10 people worldwide, and it can have a significant impact on patients' quality of life. The disease is characterized by gradual loss of kidney function over time, leading to a range of health complications. CKD patients may face a variety of challenges, being them physical, psychological, social, and financial. I still remember my days of fatigue, nausea, muscle cramps, and all the associated emotional tolls, and the sense of hopelessness going through the progressive episodes of renal impairment, renal failure, and renal dialysis. Now, one can imagine the additional challenges and complications imposed on CKD patients during times of sudden or unexpected events, such as war, natural disasters, or pandemic outbreak. Imagine the inability to access necessary medical care due to disruptions in the local communities, as well as the healthcare system. Imagine the shortage of services, facilities, and healthcare workers. Imagine the health and safety risks in the healthcare facilities due to physical damage or infectious disease outbreak there. Imagine the struggles to get to medications and treatments, as well as even basic food and clean water supply. Imagine the greater risk of injury due to patients' compromised mobility or severe illness due to their weakened immune systems. Imagine the desperation when the patients cannot evacuate safely due to damage to utilities, transportation, or other infrastructure resources. Now, needless to say, CKD patients in low income and or unstable political, social, economic conditions face even greater than challenges when it comes to coping with emergency or unexpected events. There, the issue of lack of financial resources or access to necessary medical care and treatments will be even greater. So is the deficiency in assessing information on the unexpected events and on the impact on their conditions or how to manage them during the difficult time. Therefore, it is important that the entire society recognize the unique experience and needs of CKD patients and provide necessary support and resources to help manage their conditions and cope with the unexpected contingencies. For that to happen, it does take a village. This is why it is important for CKD patients to actively participate in the decision-making process to ensure that public health policies, procedures, guidelines, and contingency plans are sensible from the patient's perspective. This is why it is essential for us CKD patients to voice out our concerns and needs to our healthcare providers, government officials, and other organizations for patient-centric holistic approach to disaster-related stress tests, risk management, and mitigation. Through policy advocacy, what we CKD patients trying to achieve is to ensure that we receive the best possible care and support during the time of difficulty. Then what about our policymakers? They should provide policy leadership to ensure that healthcare systems are prepared for the unexpected events by creating contingency plans to make medical services remain available during times of disruption. It is policymakers' job to properly allocate resources for medical supplies and personnel, as well as creating emergency protocols. It is also policymakers' job to formulate policies that ensure CKD patients access to treatment, medications, and accurate information, as well as financial support for those who need it. Now, sensible policies should also promote general awareness of kidney disease, as well as provide more comprehensive support services, such as educational materials, support groups, and counseling services. Sensible policies should definitely entail well-communicated contingency plans tailored to CKD patients' needs. This may include alternative operational modalities relating to in-center dialysis or home dialysis options, transportation assistance to and from appointments, and patients' access to the necessary medication, equipment, and personnel during times of disruption. CKD patients should advocate for increased access to social services such as housing assistance, financial aid, and employment opportunities. Patients should also advocate for policies that provide support to our caregivers and family members, allowing them to better understand, assist with patients' conditions. Healthcare providers can provide kidney patients with the resources and support they need to cope with unexpected events, including information on preventive measures to protect one's health, such as vaccinations and medications, as well as an emergency plan for medical care and treatment. Healthcare providers can also provide emotional support and counseling to help patients cope with the stress and anxiety associated with such unexpected events. When it comes to mental health, healthcare providers can provide kidney patients with the necessary support and resources to cope with unexpected events. Healthcare providers can provide counseling to help patients manage their stress and anxiety. Additionally, healthcare providers can provide information on relaxation techniques, such as deep breathing and mindfulness exercise, which can be beneficial to manage stress and anxiety. Healthcare providers can also provide referrals to mental health professionals if the patient's stress and anxiety become too overwhelming to handle on their own. Finally, healthcare providers can help patients to connect with support groups and forums where patients may also be dealing with similar issues. We as patients have an important role to play during unexpected events by taking proactive steps to protect our health and learning how to access medical care and other resources. First and foremost, we should stay informed, which include familiarity with our own health and safety status, medical and care needs, and facilities of our healthcare providers. It is also important for us to stay informed about local, national, and international news about the status of the emergency situation so that we can be aware of any potential threats or dangers to our well-being. We should also be aware of latest contingency plans, which covers an evacuation plan. We should always have an emergency kit standby. The kit should at least consist of emergency contacts, information on how to call for help and where to go for medical attention, along with the food, water, medication, medical supply, and medical records. It is important to manage stress and anxiety during an emergency through deep breathing, meditation exercise, mindfulness, and relaxation techniques, as well as any help offered by mental health professionals and support groups. Now, we should not underestimate the power and effectiveness of our support network built over time, such as family, friends, local communities, and peer support groups, which can be great resources when we face emergency and unexpected events. Patient groups can provide invaluable support and resources to those living with kidney disease. By connecting with other patient groups who understand the challenges of living with a chronic illness, peer groups can provide emotional support and help reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness. They can also provide more practical tips on how to manage symptoms, treatments, and lifestyle changes. International cooperation and collaboration are essential during times of great difficulties, especially when it comes to providing medical care to CKD patients in lower income and or unstable political, social, and economic conditions. Governments should work together to ensure that medical supplies and personnel remain available in all countries for equitable access by patients, regardless of their political and economic situation. International organizations such as the World Health Organization, the ISN, and the IFKF all have important roles to play in providing resources and assistance to CKD patients. It is also important for government to work together to ensure that medical education is accessible to those who need in order to keep them better informed in managing their conditions. By working together, we can ensure that all individuals have access to quality care no matter where they live. In summary, CKD patients face a range of challenges that can have a major impact on their quality of life. It is important for policymakers, international health organizations, and healthcare providers to recognize these issues and provide support and resources to help CKD patients to manage their conditions and deal with the unexpected. With the advancement of medical technologies and the concerted efforts of policymakers, healthcare professionals, and us as patients, better confidence and assurance can be built that we should and can receive proper care and support to deal with the unexpected during the time of great difficulties. Thank you very much for your time. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have during the panel discussions.
Thank you very much the three speakers, giving different perspective on the issues. So may I welcome all of you back on the screen. Hello, Ifeoma, my co-moderator, Dina is here. Bill, can you come back in? Yes. And Adrian as well. Ifeoma and myself will moderate this discussion, which we have about 20 minutes or so. Thank you very much, Adrian. I know you have to rush off to another webinar. Maybe we start off with one or two questions for you first, because maybe the first question for me, and then Ifeoma may chip in as well. Today I read in the newspaper, of course, we all know Singapore has done very well with the COVID in the way that the leadership and all the other things have managed the COVID outbreak over the last 3 years. And today, you probably know that Singapore government have issued a white paper looking back, what was done well. More important is what can be improved. Is there any learning point from you on that for the patients and the healthcare system?
Well, I think everyone could have done better, and I think what the COVID pandemic has taught us is the importance on home-based dialysis. I think every single healthcare system has recognized how much more easier it was to manage patients who were on peritoneal dialysis, be it the fact from the perspective of infection control or the perspective of movement restrictions. And there are papers that have demonstrated that peritoneal dialysis patients have done remarkably well during the pandemic. And I think that has taught us of the significant push for home-based dialysis. And I think KDIGO in a very timely manner has held a controversy conference on trying to increase home-based dialysis. So from the renal perspective. And I think that in fact has propelled many healthcare systems to consider peritoneal dialysis as a very key modality where previously it's not been. And I think that's one of the key things that we can take away from the pandemic. Besides the pandemic, I think we have also recently these are strange times where we have war happening, we have earthquakes and disaster happening at an interval that is rapid. And I think having a renal disaster preparedness for especially countries at risk of all these is extremely important. So I think while Singapore has done well, I think we are learning from everyone else in the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. We welcome Latha, our president of the IFKF as well. Maybe I just follow on your point. The take from my reading from the newspaper, I have not read the full paper yet, is that I actually fought through SARS in the 2003, and also for Hong Kong at the beginning. We also thought we can play out like SARS, and that's what we caught up with. But I fully concur with you, the advantage of home dialysis. In Hong Kong, as you probably know, we have 80% of patients on home dialysis, and they just don't have to go to hospitals. Therefore, they did not die from the COVID at the beginning, and we saved a lot of lives there. As I think CAPD and APD are okay unless you've got war and things like that. Okay. Ifeoma, do you want to ask the next question?
Thank you very much, Adrian. Very, very good lecture, articulate and all, and drawing our attention to what we need to know. I'm particularly interested in what you said about the double-edged sword of donations, because, when we have such things, people are shipping all sorts of things to you and you get overwhelmed, and may not be things that are relevant. How do you avert this? How do you get them to stop and not look like an ingrate? Because I can appreciate what you're saying. You're loaded with all sorts of things you don't need. And the second aspect of my question, I noticed you dwelt mainly on dialysis and hemodialysis and nothing about transplant patients. I'm speaking particularly because for people from Africa, for people from low-income areas, getting their medications, which are not produced in their countries, is a problem. During COVID, our people suffered a great deal. A lot of them lost their grafts because they couldn't access medications. So I would want you to comment on those. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ifeoma. I think those are important questions, and I think we can answer those actually together. I think the important part is, and what we have learned and experienced from the Lebanon explosion, for example, a couple, I think 1 or 2 years back, is that I think what is key is that you must have a coordinating center deciding what the needs of the local population are. I think establishing communication with your local leaders and local nephrologists is very important, because during the Lebanon explosion, we had people on the ground telling us what's happening, because none of us are there. They tell us what is needed. They tell us that the supplies of dialyzers is going to run out in the next 2 weeks. So having that key information, including transplant critical immunosuppression drugs, is very important to us. And what we did as part of the ISN Renal Disaster Preparedness Group, we act as a coordinating center to get all these information, and we send the information out to donors, and we tell them, thank you for all your help. But I think what we need are the following. It becomes a very directed request for donations. And then we actually have a coordination with the UN site who was able to assist with the deliveries, and so it's kind of a link of a loop.
Yeah.
We have local people, we have a coordinating center, we have people facilitating the delivery of the groups to where the storage can be done. And I think that is something that needs to be developed in the renal disaster preparedness plan, not something that you create when a disaster happens.
Yeah.
And both of these then helps. Otherwise, your storage capacity will just be overwhelmed.
Yeah, your experience is showing through. It just shows through that you have so much experience in preparedness and crisis management. Thank you so much.
I think Bill has his hand raised.
It's Bill's there. Yeah, we bring Bill back in. That's our experience as well with the earthquake in China. There's too much stuff that is not usable. And in disaster management, what we teach is there's 4 C's. You need to have someone to command, control, coordinate. That's the thing that's lacking. And finally, communicate. Those are the 4 C's that we are not paying attention to. Bill, did you raise a hand?
No, I just raised a hand because my video was disabled.
Maybe we'll welcome Latha. Latha, will you say a few words?
Yeah, well, I think the disasters bring the best out of people. That's what we should remember as well. I mean, we always complain a lot of things. Things are very chaotic, right? But remember, in COVID, in Hong Kong where I'm living, I mean, thousands of healthcare workers work, tirelessly to try very hard to bring back the regular services as much as possible. So I think as patients, we appreciate those efforts. I mean, it's a very difficult time for everybody, for healthcare workers, for the politicians, and for patients. I mean, we talk from patients' perspective and our needs and our difficulties, and just think about the healthcare workers. They also have experienced very, very difficult time. So I think the understanding, the communication between the healthcare workers and patients are very important. I mean, there's a lot of disinformation in the market and in the situation like this. I mean, so communication is really the key between the patients and their caregivers.
I think I agree with you. Okay, sorry, Bill. I think I agree with you there, Bill, because having the right information and not fake information is very important, because a lot of things fly in the social media, and some patients who are not particularly aware hang on to that, and maybe do harm to themselves. I think your talk was very, very good because you brought in, you kind of summarized every aspect, even talked about the roles patients expect from the government, the roles you expect from the professionals, that's the nephrologist and all people, the people in the profession, and the roles from you. So that is very, very key. I think it's important that people listen to patients. The people that are wearing the shoes that are tight on them is very key, that we listen and know how to help. Yes, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, I was very pleased to bring in Bill, which I've known for the last few years. And Latha is the president of IFKF. Latha, do you want to say a few words while you're here? Can't hear you yet.
Good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So of late, we've not had too many disasters for us to deal with. But I think it's the PD that that kind of really saves people at the end of the day, because everything else, I mean, we do have a protocol for disaster management in India, but as far as dialysis is concerned, yes, PD is the only is given a lot of importance, and I think that's the only thing that is easily doable. But even then, you know, getting people to get into, you know, getting access with the catheter and everything is a challenge, but it's easier than hemodialysis. So I'm sorry, I kind of clocked in late because I just got mixed up with the timings, but I thank you so much to each and every one of you for a wonderful session. And we're really grateful to all of you on behalf of IFKF-WKA. And of course, ISN and the World Kidney Day team. So thank you.
Latha.
Yes, tell me.
I was just going to make a comment about having a protocol, because one thing I've noticed about having protocols, they have protocols and they keep it on the shelf and it's not used. So of what use is it? If you notice, like fire departments and fire drills, once in a while you have the fire drills. So it's in people's consciousness that this is what should be done when there's fire. Do we have such happening with preparedness for crisis? That's the way we should go. That's the way we should be thinking. So that is in our consciousness that during crisis, this is what I'm supposed to do. It's like second nature. You don't have to like going through the protocol again. You already know what you should be doing.
So the thing is that I think in India, of course, when you have to deal with communicable diseases, which is a far bigger crisis than non-communicable diseases. So it's kind of, it doesn't take a back seat, but it takes that much longer as regards preparedness is concerned. So I would think, yes, advocacy is very important. And we do have this protocol, but at the end of the day, as you say, being prepared and, you know, when you're dealing with maybe lack of amenities, food, and so many other things, this does take a back seat. So we need to bring it to the forefront. And we hopefully, I've got on to the patient care of the Indian Society of Nephrology patient advocacy group. So hopefully, maybe we can make a difference. Let's see.
Yeah, you do need to run drills, especially how quickly you can switch on the command control center, the coordination channel, and all those things. I must bring Dina back in. Can the last 3 or 4 minutes, maybe can you share with us your take on the earthquake? Because looking back, I think we have learned a lot. The Sumatra earthquake, for example, how to shift patients away from disaster area to good area, and how to bring other people into support. And in the big earthquake in China, I actually set up a temporary satellite hemodialysis center in a tent within about 1 week or so. That can be done. We need to do that. Israel is very good in doing that. We're not learning fast enough. You can build a temporary hemodialysis with all the power within 1 or 2 weeks. I know you got a lot of friends and you're near closer to Turkey than us. What's the take on that?
Actually, in Egypt, we had a huge earthquake, but that was long time ago. It was in 1992. So I wasn't practicing still at that time. I was still a student at that time. So I just, of course, I'm aware of what was happening, but not from the medical aspect. But yes, I have friends from Turkey and I have friends from Syria. And I have shown even a report, a press report for what's happening in Gaziantep. And Professor Aisha Balot, whom actually I hope that she was able to join us today, but unfortunately she apologized yesterday. But as you see, there are hundreds of patients and hundreds of kidney patients who lost their homes, who lost their units, and the same in Syria. And those dialysis patients were out of place for some time and stayed some of them were evacuated even from their cities, and they had to move for another city and had to stay in the cars. And those are people that I personally know that they had to stay in cars for days till they were able to be evacuated. So of course this had an impact on their dialysis plan, on their medication plans. I agree with all what that was said about the peritoneal dialysis, that this should be a rescuer in those situations. The CAPD is actually the rescuer in these situations, that it doesn't need any technology, it doesn't need any electricity, any water supply, but still just have the problem with providing bags. So there should be a policy that all this has to be communicated with the ministries of health. Sorry?
Yeah, I was going to ask how you think we can get our governments, NGOs, ministries, and I mean the superstructure to be involved in this, because we need to get them going. We need to get them moving. We need them to see that we have these things go through. Yeah.
Yes, and there should be ready-made policies that to be applied at the time of the disaster and not just waiting to create new ones. So all these policies has to be ready. And how are those patients going to receive their dialysis or going to receive their medication? And if one unit is affected, which units are they going to be shifted to?
You have to shift them around.
Sorry?
Yeah. Yes, you need to shift them around a bit as well.
Yes,
Ifeoma, I think the home dialysis option is a very important topic, and hopefully one day World Kidney Day may address it. I'm afraid to say that there's a lot to do with healthcare policy in the system. A lot of the part of the world, they really, the hemodialysis centers sold such a business. They will never shift to PD as such. In Hong Kong, we do it for everyone because it's the cheapest treatment. Patients actually do the treatment. We don't have to hire nurses. That's a different conversation altogether.
Yeah.
Any more questions from you, Ifeoma, or anyone want to raise? To me, I think the whole crunch is you need to be prepared. My experience, for the last 20 years, I've been doing quality and safety risk management to be prepared. But even be prepared, you have to adapt very quickly. No two disaster is going to be the same. COVID ended up quite different from SARS. That's why we got problem in the beginning. But most important is coordination. And I fully agree with Bill. What the patient needs is information, true information. And that's our role, the 4 keywords of which I mentioned. Well, last question for anyone.
In the podcast we had earlier, we had, I think Dina was on, and we're talking about how we would come up with a protocol. I mean, we know the governments may not be able to come up with the protocol, but we as the associations, we as the doctors, as the professionals, we can put together a protocol which they can modify to suit them. They can adopt and adapt those protocols, and they are used for the drills. I think we can do that as an association.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I just wanted to say a quick example of what happened in Chennai when we had the floods. The a few dialysis units got flooded, and then there was no electricity. So I think we need to learn from all this as to how Or maybe dialysis units should be placed on higher floors. And we need to see that there's uninterrupted power even during, floods. So, of course, these are where everything is established and there's something like a flood coming in. But of course, if it's the earthquake and other things, then it's an entirely different kind of challenge altogether. So we can learn from the past and kind of try to improve on whatever disaster care that we can give on little things that will make a difference in the lives of the people.
Especially in the countries who are prone to such natural disasters, yes, that they are aware already of. Some countries have floods that's happening every now and then, or earthquakes. So there should be, it's easier for them to identify the plan that they need to have. Yeah. And of course, to be communicated with the authorities. They are the one who will apply it, actually.
In the interest of time, we've reached the 75 minutes mark. So I would like to conclude by thanking every one of you here. In particular, I would like to thank the patients because they're the most important person of the whole conversation. You have a voice. You can talk to the government people. So once again, thank you everyone very much for a very interesting, very broad presentation of topics. We'll have the next session about 11 hours time in the US time when I'll be up in 4 o'clock in the morning to speak to everyone again. Until then, see you. Good night. Good day
Thank
for everyone.
Much. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye. See you later today.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.